Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. A diplomatic clash between Ukraine and Hungary is spilling into Brussels. The detention of Ukrainian bank staff carrying cash and gold alongside a dispute over Russian oil flows has intensified tensions, raising questions about EU unity, sanctions policy and support for Kyiv. To explore this topic, we're joined by Roland Freudenstein. He's co-founder Brussels Freedom Hub. Minister Freudenstein, welcome back, and thank you for taking the time.
Good morning from Brussels.
Good morning to you, sir. So, the rhetoric's heated up, but then it's evolved into the blockage of oil flows into Hungary through Ukraine, and the holding of Ukrainian bank staff in Hungary. How is Brussels seeing this escalation?
Well, I think it would be an understatement to say Brussels is highly worried. So this has the potential of escalating even further. And at the very negative scenario, at the end of this, there could be Ukraine being in serious financial trouble because the loan is not coming, and Viktor Orbán winning his embattled election in Hungary on April 12th. But that's the negative outlier. And I think right now, the EU institutions are doing everything to calm down the situation, de-escalate somehow, and cross that bridge that we have to cross in the next couple of weeks.
Is Ukraine in a position to play Hungary's game? In other words, a quid pro quo. Hungary stops the veto of the loan to Ukraine, and suddenly the Druzhba pipeline is repaired quickly. What do you think?
That's the plan, according to what we've heard in the last 48 hours. But, before that, there were some angry exchanges, also with, I think, President Zelensky saying some not very smart things, like appearing to threaten Viktor Orbán personally with, giving his address or giving the address of a certain person, and it was clear he meant Orbán, to Ukrainian soldiers and see what they have to say and so on. And at the same time, Viktor Orbán absolutely tries to escalate this conflict. He has no interest in calming this down. He wants to have an issue to mobilize his flagging election campaign in the country. So, there are still numerous uncertainties connected to this.
Right. I want to come to the campaign in just a second, but staying with Brussels, is Brussels reviewing its unanimity rules and requirements, especially in light of the fact that the EU is considering enlargement?
Look, I've been in this town for a couple of decades now, and the issue of introducing qualified majority voting, in other words, abolishing the veto on foreign and security policy, is returning regularly. But indeed, you're absolutely right. It has been intensifying in recent months, I would say, because of Hungary's numerous vetoes and numerous ways of torpedoing and blocking anything that concerns assistance for Ukraine. So we're discussing this, but frankly speaking, realistically, I don't think many people in Brussels think that we are quickly going to have majority voting on foreign policy, simply because it's not just Hungary and Slovakia who would be afraid of being overruled on such existential questions, but also other small countries, other small member states. And I don't see anything quickly happening, because in order to get to majority voting on foreign policy, you need unanimity. It's as simple as that, and we don't have this unanimity.
Yes, but the other side of the same coin, Mr. Freudenstein, is that Europe is shooting itself in the foot On the one hand, it's supporting Ukraine in its defence against Russia, and on the other hand, it's supporting Hungary, who many people, or the country that many people see being controlled by Putin's puppet. It's a circular argument, isn't it? Something has to break, doesn't it?
Well, first of all, yes, you're right. But rules are rules. And we have the Treaty on the European Union, which foresees, which includes actually things like the national veto on foreign and security policy. So in order to change that, you still have to obey the rules. Now, what has happened in the past too often is that member states, other than Hungary and Slovakia, have actually delegated to the EU institutions, especially the Commission, the task, the sometimes painful task, of reining in member states that too often use their veto and pressure them, by just saying that, look, you expect our financial solidarity with the EU funds, you also have to practice that solidarity. I mean, that's a logical line. But for the other member states to outsource this task to the Commission, frankly speaking, hasn't been effective. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of months is that more and more EU member state capitals have realized that they have to exert pressure bilaterally on Hungary, by bringing into the game their own investments, their own bilateral relations, their own dialogue with Hungary, and so on, and thereby show the Hungarians that this is not a battle between patriotic forces and the evil EU institutions. This is a battle between a tiny minority of member states and the vast majority of democratically elected governments. And that, I think, has begun to happen. And I think that might help us out of this impasse.
Well, certainly, or perhaps for the moment, but the EU is going to think twice now, or maybe even three times, before it continues its enlargement, isn't it, as a result of this?
Absolutely. I mean, this influences Hungary's behavior and its backslide, both in rule of law domestically, but also its behavior on existential EU security questions, has been a lesson. And we will try, with any future enlargement, to ensure better compliance with the EU treaties at home and sustainable, lasting compliance with the EU treaties, much more direct consequences for violating the treaties in domestic behavior and also in terms of solidarity with other member states.
Right, now, focusing down on Hungary and the upcoming elections in April, what is the dynamic looking like at the moment?
Well, for about half a year now, sometime after the European elections of 2024, the opposition TISA party, with Péter Magyar at its head, is rising in the polls. And according to most current opinion polls, they actually have a considerable lead on the governing party Fidesz of Viktor Orbán. That would mean, according to the latest figures, that Orbán risks losing power and that Péter Magyar could be the next prime minister of Hungary. Now, that would have a fantastic number of implications. It would mean a big defeat for national populism, globally speaking. It would also probably mean that many Fidesz people would land in prison for corruption and other crimes that they have committed against the rule of law. So Fidesz is doing everything to stay in power. And so far, they never managed to mobilize their own followers sufficiently to counter the opposition's very effective narrative that Orbán has economically ruined the country. And whatever he says about foreign policy and fighting evil Brussels and fighting evil Kyiv, The Hungarian economy is in shambles. The country is corrupt, highly corrupt, and therefore there has to be, after 16 years, a change of government. So Orbán is trying to counter this by a deliberate escalation with Kyiv and Brussels at the same time. And he believes that with the Druzhba pipeline and the question of Russian oil supplies to Hungary, he has found the issue where he can break this spell of the opposition using the economy and using domestic questions of corruption.
Well, we shall see if that works. I mean, there's still 5 weeks to go, or thereabouts, for the elections, so a lot can happen. Now, were there to be, or if the risk of a change of government in Hungary is, as you say, quite high, that's not going to make Putin very happy. Is he involved in this conversation somehow?
Absolutely. He just sent a team of GRU, that is Russian military intelligence, officials to Budapest. They were officially received at the airport, and their task is to use social media and use artificial intelligence and the state-of-the-art techniques to influence public opinion in Hungary. I mean, that is a sign, if I've ever seen any, that Putin is highly interested in Orbán keeping his job. And I'll tell you more. The two other superpowers of this world and their leaders, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, also have a stake in Viktor Orbán remaining prime minister of Hungary. So, you know, the odds are fantastic, but we have this stubborn impression that domestic issues trump everything else in this election. And if that is true, well, then Peter Magyar, against the will of Putin, Trump, and Xi Jinping, will become the next prime minister of Hungary.
What's in it for China?
Oh, Hungary is now has been acting for a couple of years as China's outpost in Europe, inside the European Union. I mean, foreign direct investment, presence of Chinese citizens in the country, percentage-wise, compared to the overall population. Hungary is number one in all these areas. So, and Hungary has already emphasized for a long time that they have no problem in actually a friendly relationship with the Communist Party. You know, let that sink in 35 years after the fall of the Iron Curtain. But Viktor Orbán has been actually also in his behavior in the European Council acting as an agent of China, not only of Russia. So China would be rather worried if Viktor Orbán loses power.
Well, you can certainly tell about a person by the friends he keeps. Roland Freudenstein, thank you very much indeed for sharing your analysis with our audience, and have a good day, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.